All warfare is based on deception. For years, the West's hypocrisy has made the world a battlefield. The moment
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be talking about the Holosun Hm3x and why it is probably the best budget magnifier on the market. But before we get into that, if you want to help the channel out, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, as all that sort of stuff is free, and go ahead and comment literally anything down below. Now, on top of that, I do want to thank the sponsor of the video and the channel, and that is, of course, Gun Deals. If you don't know, Gun Deals is just a website that provides you with links to some of the best products and prices within the industry. So if you're interested in cool gear at the best prices, go ahead and check them out. Oftentimes they have their own exclusive coupon codes, and on top of that, I do actually produce specific content for them over there on their gun.deals channel. So go ahead and check them out. And in fact, after this video, I'm actually filming a video on this Geisley rifle. So of course, a big thank you to gun.deals. Go ahead and check them out. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the Holosun Hm3x, which is of course a 3x magnifier. Now, full disclosure on this optic, I purchased this for distributor pricing from one of the companies that I'm set up as a distributor for. I have no relationship with Holosun whatsoever. The only communication that I've had with them are on two optics of theirs that I've killed, a Holosun 503CU that I killed in about 5 rounds on a 12 gauge. My customer service experience was excellent. And I actually upgraded to the Holosun 512C, which you would have seen a couple weeks ago on the channel. Now, the other experience I had with their customer service was not quite the same, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming video. But for what it is, I don't really have any relationship with the company whatsoever. I think they make some excellent value products and some just top tier products in general. So let's go ahead and talk about the Hm3x and get into some of the base specifics of the magnifier. So now, one very nice thing about this magnifier is that it does come with actually a very good QD mount. So on the bottom here, we have 2 integrated recoil lugs plus a very large crossbolt. It's not really necessary to have recoil lugs on a magnifier, but it does help it hold very tight to your rail and not shift or do anything else like that. On top of that, we have a very simple QD lever with a very decent size clamping section, so it will provide a good locking surface area to your upper receiver. And of course, you do have the tightness adjustment on the outside because every rail is different, and even going from different guns, different Cerakotes, paint jobs, that sort of thing, you're going to need to adjust the tightness depending again on your upper receiver, because there is a little bit of variance in there. Now, the next really nice thing about the magnifier, and something that kind of sets it apart from its competition in this price category, which is about $200 down to $150 on sale. So this is pretty much one of the cheaper big name magnifiers that you can purchase, and it does have some very excellent specs that we're getting into. Now, one of the very nice things about it is it does not have a push button swivel. It is a detent. So there's a spring and a detent that kind of holds it in place, and then just simply apply 10-15 pounds of pressure and it will swing into position. Now, most of my shooting with this magnifier, which at this point is a couple thousand rounds, just because it goes on every single red dot gun that I own, because the only time I would not be running a magnifier on a red dot was if it was a home defense gun, because I probably wouldn't be using a magnifier for a home defense gun, and it would just add a little bit more size and weight that I don't need. But most of the time, with most of the red dots that I'm running, I'm basically always running a magnifier, unless I'm running like a super tall mount or something else like that. But having a very nice buttonless push design means that you can get this in and out of deployment very, very quickly. So in a lot of the footage you'll see in the intro and some of the other B-roll that I'm putting in, I like to very simply raise my right hand, my firing hand, and push it into position, or lift up, rip it out, and then go right back to firing. It's very, very fast, very efficient, allows me to keep the gun in my shoulder on target the entire time, and do it a lot faster than bringing my left hand up and over while adjusting the gun, then get back onto the gun, then find the target again. I can keep the gun in the same position and just use my right hand. So for me, I think it's very, very nice. Now, the other magnifier that a while ago I was recommending and saying was the best, solely because I just hadn't tried this one out yet, was the SIG Juliet 3 Micro. And this magnifier is going to be better than it in basically every way. This one here does have the push button style, which is fine. It's very solid. It holds its position very well, but it is an extra step to get it in and out of deployment, and it doesn't really add any security, as I've never had this go in or out when I didn't want it to. Theoretically, you could have it on and then maybe bump it or drop it, and then it might move on you, but that's a very, very rare circumstance. Now, as you see it here in my hands, it is currently set at the absolute height, so I think it's like 143 or 153. Holosun does include a spacer, so you can raise it up to the 163 lower third height. However, most of my optics that I'm running right now work very well for either height. I do get a lot of questions about, hey, will this work with a certain optic? And the answer is almost undoubtedly yes. Unless you're running a super tall mount or a super short mount, you will be able to get basically any magnifier on the market to line up well with it. Most of them include spacers. All of the ones that I've tried have included different spacers for different heights. And most of the time, if you find a good medium-sized height like this one, you don't even need to use the spacers for most standard sized mounts. So there's always exceptions to that rule, but by and large, this will work with basically every single red dot on the market, and I've tested it with probably 10 different red dots in a bunch of different mounting configurations, and it's worked excellently with all of them. Now, in terms of construction, it's going to be fairly standard for the industry. So we have 6061 T6 aluminum, hard coat anodized in this very nice kind of flat black anodization. It looks really good. The machining quality on everything is really good. You do have steel mounting hardware on the bottom here, which is quite nice, though again, torque on a magnifier mount is not as important as torque on a red dot mount, so I'm not going to be as critical about this component, although it is again set up very, very well. Now, well, a couple of the things that are going to make this magnifier much, much better than basically all the other budget magnifiers that I've looked through, including the Vortex VMX3, the older one, and the new Vortex 3X Micro as well. This has better eye relief, better field of view, and better glass than all of them. So for the money, I don't think that this is going to be beaten by any other magnifier that I've tried on the market. So let's go ahead and use the SIG Juliet 3 Micro as kind of a proxy for those other magnifiers, because they all perform fairly similarly to this one, just for more money, which is why I said that this one here was the best budget magnifier before I tried the Holosun. So this has about 2.5 inches of eye relief, and by 2.5 inches, I mean 2.5 inches, not 2.5 inches, but it's actually 3.5 inches. I mean, it literally has 2.5 inches of eye relief. So right about there is all of the eye relief that you're going to get. And now with the Holosun Hm3x, it's only about 2 3/4, maybe a little bit under 3 inches of eye relief. However, because it is a longer design, a little bit heavier than some of the micro magnifiers, you're still going to get the perception of a much longer eye relief, of course, because you don't need to be choked up on the stock quite as much. So with a very short magnifier where the eye relief starts right here, 2.5 inches is only about this far, but on a longer magnifier, that eye relief obviously puts you back into this range, which is a much more comfortable, much more natural range, especially if you're used to using like LPVOs and stuff like that. It's going to be very, very nice. Now, on top of the very good eye relief, we also have a fairly decent eye box for a prism style magnifier, which again is going to allow it to feel more like an LPVO, more forgiving, much nicer, much easier to use, which when we're talking about a magnifier, which is generally a little bit more tricky in general, making it a little bit nicer and a little bit easier is going to be a huge pro, pro of using a magnifier. Now on top of that, you're also going to be getting the biggest field of view out of any of the budget magnifiers that I've tested. So at 3x, you're going to be getting a field of view of 37 feet. That is very, very similar to certain ACOGs, which are renowned for their very good field of view. And that's going to beat a lot of other standard 3x prisms on the market, including most budget magnifiers. I believe this one here has like 30 or 32 feet of field of view versus 37. It does make a very large difference, especially when you're looking through bigger windowed optics, because you're able to see a lot more magnified, which is the reason you're using a magnifier, is to see something in greater detail. And with this, you get a lot more image inside of the glass because of course you have that greater field of view. And because of that field of view, it's a lot easier to use. It's a lot easier to find targets. It's a lot easier to see multiple targets at the same time through your glass. So whatever it is that you're planning on using it for, whether it's hunting, more serious use, or for just like 3-gun stuff like that, it's going to perform better in almost every single way than a lot of the other magnifiers on the market. Now, last thing that we want to talk about, which is very, very important when we're talking about magnifiers, is going to be their glass. And the reason why the glass is very important is you're going to be putting these glass behind another set of glass. So if this glass is good, or let's say mediocre, and this glass is also mediocre, you're going to be getting a very bad, very muddy image, very dark, very dim, that sort of thing. Now, in the SIG Romeo 5 XDR that I have on this Geisley 16-inch Super Duty, the glass for a red dot is fairly good. There's very little tint, there's very little blue haze, anything else like that. On certain other optics, it's a lot more aggressive. And when you combine it with the Holosun Hm3x, you get a very, very good image. And I'm going to say that the Holosun Hm3x has very, very good glass. It's very crisp, it's very bright. You don't get a lot of chromatic aberration. The edge-to-edge clarity is very, very good. So this is not going to be the limiting factor in terms of your image quality. Most of the time it's going to be determined by the red dot that you're using. Now, if you're using an EOTech or aim points or something with just phenomenal glass, this is going to lag behind those quite a bit. But in terms of budget red dots, which you're most likely going to be pairing this budget magnifier with a budget red dot, in terms of budget red dots, this is not going to be the limiting factor. It's almost always going to be the red dot itself. So for instance, on the Holosun 512C, which I talked about a little bit earlier, it has a very, very aggressive blue notch filter. And so when you combine it with this magnifier, you get a very, very blue looking magnified image because of that very aggressive blue notch filter. On the SIG Romeo 5 XDR, it does have a notch filter, of course, because it does still want to increase that 50,000 hours of battery life, but it's much less noticeable even on the much smaller window of the Romeo 5 XDR. And so you get a much better image when combining this magnifier with the SIG Romeo 5. Now it's going to vary between red dot to red dot. And so if you have red dot with a very, very orange or blue tint to it, and then you look through the magnifier through the glass and you think, oh, it doesn't look that good. But then when you look through it separately and the glass on the magnifier is perfectly clear, then again, the limiting factor is almost always going to be the red dot, not the magnifier, until you get into much more expensive, much nicer red dot. Now, a couple other features on the Hm3x that I haven't mentioned yet is that it does, of course, have a very nice rear diopter to adjust it to your eyes, because everybody's eyes are going to be a little bit different. And then it does, of course, have windage and elevation, not for zeroing purposes, but to center the red dot within the glass itself, because again, you have different red dots, different mounts, and so that red dot may not be perfectly centered, and so you can use the windage and elevation to actually center the red dot within the glass. Now, in terms of parallax, it can or cannot be an issue depending again on the red dot itself, and I've heard some people say that adding a magnifier adds no parallax, and adding a magnifier adds a lot of parallax, and you need to center it to try and remove as much parallax as possible. In my personal experience, I would lean towards the fact that there is some parallax error added when you add in a magnifier in general. However, again, in my personal experience, it has never been an issue on medium-sized targets out to, say, 300 yards, which for most people is going to be the effective range of a red dot magnifier combo. Because again, a red dot and a magnifier isn't necessarily about stretching out to 500, 600, 700 yards. It's more about positive identification and putting your round exactly where you want it, being able to get a little bit more detail and maybe making those longer range shots a little bit easier. Because again, On a 16-inch 5.56 at 300 yards, there's almost no drop. So even if you're shooting at like a 10-inch target, if you aim towards the top of the target with a 5200-0, you're most likely going to be getting an impact, again, depending on your environmentals and ammo and all that other sort of fun stuff. So most of the time, I wouldn't necessarily recommend these for a long-range application. If you're looking for something that can do 0 to 600 yards, then you're probably just going to be going with an LPVO anyways. But for 0 to 300 yards and allowing you to get a lot more magnification, because 3x magnification is a very, very good magnification. I've taken a 3x prism, the Swamp Fox Tri-Hawk, all the way out to 530 yards, no problem, on an 11.5 by 20, so a 2/3 reduced torso style target. And I've had no issues with that whatsoever. Now, really briefly, I do want to talk about durability on this optic. Now, it's really difficult to do like a double drop test on the optic to test for parallax, though I did actually do a double drop test on it. It did get dropped on multiple guns as I was doing red dot testing and stuff like that. And it has some scratches and nicks as it would usually have from anything that I test, but other than that, no problems with it whatsoever. I didn't have any issues with anything coming loose or wearing out throughout the course of, again, about 2,000 rounds or so, because it's been on basically every red dot that I've shot. A couple very minor downsides that I would have in general with a magnifier of this type is that when you do shoot it on 5.56 or 7.62 by 39, there is a tiny bit of wobble, and it's more noticeable on camera than it is when you're actually shooting it, because when you're actually shooting it, you're not waiting for the wobble to stop, you're waiting for the gun to come back on target. Even if you're shooting very, very quickly, you'll almost never notice the magnifier having that tiny bit of wobble underneath recoil. And the other very minor downside that I would have is that this isn't a micro style magnifier, so it is going to be a little bit longer, a little bit heavier than some of the other magnifiers that are on the market. Now, I believe this weighs in at about 8 to 9 ounces. So when you combine that with a red dot, a micro style red dot, you're looking at about a 15-ounce total package, depending on mounts and stuff like that, of course. So overall, it's still a very lightweight, a very, very versatile platform. And if you're looking for something that can allow you to make very, very quick, accurate shots from 0 to 300 yards, a red dot and magnifier are going to do a very, very good job at that. So for me, I personally really like it. The performance has been excellent. Like I said, you get a good eye relief, you get good eye box, you get good glass, you get a very good field of view, especially for the money. Again, I think I paid at a distributor price about 150 bucks for it. It's an excellent magnifier, and I would spend the $180, $200 normal price for this style of magnifier, because again, it does do a very, very good job. Now, I've looked through the Vortex 3X Micro, the Vortex, the VMX3, their older one, the SIG Juliet 3 Micro. I haven't tried the SIG Juliet 3, the regular sized one, though I've heard that one there is fairly good as well. But for right now, for my money, the Holosun Hm3x is the best budget magnifier on the market, and it performs way above its pay grade. I would have no issues putting this on a very expensive rifle with a very expensive red dot. Not that this red dot is expensive, but in general, I would not have an issue putting this on a very, very expensive setup, because it performs at or above all of my expectations for a 3x magnifier. So the next real step up in performance is going to be about double the cost. So for most people, that's not going to be worth it, but for people who just want, again, top end performance, it's absolutely going to be worth it. I don't have any issues with the durability of the magnifier itself. Again, it didn't introduce any parallax that I couldn't solve inside of 300 yards. There was no problem whatsoever to hit anything that I was aiming at, provided I was doing my part. So overall, I think that the Holosun Hm3x is the best budget magnifier on the market. So that's about it for the video, guys. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think of the Holosun Hm3x or some other magnifiers that I should check out and review for you guys. But with all that out of the way, I do want to thank you guys once again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace off.